As you watch the screen, your heart begins to beat faster. There's a fluttering in the pit of your stomach. Your throat is dry. Your palms damp. Suddenly a chill runs down your spine. You clutch the person next to you. You tell yourself, it's only a movie. It's only a movie. But sooner or later, it's time to go home.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
And I'm Mike.
We're here to review Hereditary, starring Toni Collette, Alex Wolff, Millie Shapiro, Ann Dowd, and Gabriel Byrne. Directed by Ari Aster, released in 2018 on a $10 million budget, grossed over $80 million at the box office, tons of critical acclaim, etc., etc. Here on our second chapter of Shocktober. And Mike, welcome back to Film Strip. I'm glad to have you here. Tell folks about what you got going on with Amateur Auteurs and what's happening.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Yeah, I always say it every time. It's always a blast to come on and talk movies with you and having you on my show. So yeah, Amateur Auteurs. I'm glad you asked me because I guess this will be the first place that I can announce some plans that I have, especially if there's any crossover with the listenership. And if this is the first time you've been hearing it, then here's some news to come. So there've been the show has been a little quiet for the last few months, and that's been I can give a lot of different excuses from just busy being work, life getting in the way, but with that being said, I do have a goal for this might sound weird coming at this time in October, but for next year, in 2022, I want to try and release one episode every week. So I know that's a lofty goal. I've been recording stuff on my own. I got stuff with Brian, Jay. I'm hoping that you can be a part of that and make that goal come true. But that's kind of what's going on right now, is just stockpiling episodes to get that lofty goal of an episode a week in 2022. Because podcasting is so much fun, and I always feel bad when I did go on hiatuses and whatever. But yeah, that's kind of the goal for right now. But as far as the show, we talk about everything. We talk about mainstream movies. We talk about not so mainstream movies, maybe some obscure movies. I talk about short films. We do some D&D in there every now and again. We try and cover all gambit of film entertainment. And yeah, it's kind of our show. Just a little small, independent, fun-loving show. So, but yeah, we appreciate you having us.
Absolutely, man. And yeah, sure, count me in. I'm always game to come over and chat up movies with you all. I've done the every week release thing. I can tell you, I know how bold that is, so I understand. Generally here on Film Strip, we record stuff way in advance. Not this time, folks. I'll sneak peek you. This is getting recorded about a week before it comes out because Shocktober snuck up on us, and we had some scheduled move arounds and stuff. So glad you were able to jump in and help me out here, Mike, because boy, this is a big one. Has been on the request list since it occurred. And I know for sure Ron's wife is a big fan of this. My wife and I saw it as well, but I kind of want your background with not only this movie, but I guess, the whole elevated horror movement in Hollywood, stuff like Haunting of Hill House and Get Out and The Witch and, this Midsummer, lots of those things. So what's your background with that and with this movie?
Yeah, I'm glad that I definitely want to talk about this so-called elevated horror movement that we're kind of seeing right now. But I'll first start with Hereditary. So my background with Hereditary, I remember seeing a preview for this when I was a senior in college. And I believe I was seeing A Quiet Place, another movie that some may classify as elevated horror. Without going on too big of a tangent, I don't consider that. I think it's a well-crafted movie with a gimmick, and I'll just leave it at that. But I remember seeing the trailers for Hereditary and being like, it's like the next Omen. I think everyone seeing the trailers was thinking that's the angle of this movie. And I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be interesting. And then I saw that tagline of it's this generation's The Exorcist. And I've seen that tagline on so many movies that did not deserve it. So Yeah, I'm sure it's one of those frustrating taglines that you always see on movies, and I'm sure that's especially frustrating for movie buffs. Where you're like, oh, come on, like it's like saying, "Oh, our like hot wings, our wings are hot," and then you eat them and they're like mild. Like for me, it's like if you're gonna say they're hot, they better be hot, and if you're gonna say that your movie is the next Exorcist, then that better be damn scary. So I remember seeing the trailer, and I turned to my buddy Jake Shell, who's been on my show before, and I said, "Hey, we should see this movie." And one thing led to another, getting caught up in senior thesis, graduating, maybe living up college a little bit, maybe like partying a little too hard at the end of senior year. It just went under my, well, maybe not under my radar. I just didn't get a chance to get to the movie theater. And then I was taking classes, getting to nursing school, like final credits and stuff. So I just, it just slipped under. And I think it was a year later when Brian, my brother, texted me and he said, "Have you seen Hereditary?" And I said, "No, it was on my list, but I'm in nursing school now and I just didn't get around to it at school." And he said, he said, "That movie made me and my girlfriend scream and we had to turn it off." And I'm pretty sure the next day I rented the movie and watched it, because for a movie, for Brian to say that a movie impacted him in such a way that he screamed, and it wasn't like she screamed and I screamed, it wasn't like a chain reaction. It was we both were terrified. And I said, okay, I have to watch this movie. And I actually, if you go back, I guess 2019, that area, I did an episode focusing on Hereditary, where I did a predictions leading up to it. I stopped the recording and I started the movie where I thought Brian screamed. And I'm sure it's the exact moment where Jay, I think you're thinking, and anyone that's seen the movie, it's the twist. I'll just leave it at that before we get into spoilers. And I did I hit play and I recorded my thoughts up to that point, and then I did a closing thoughts after the movie was over. And I remember thinking, I guess tipping my hand a little bit, that tagline that this is the Exorcist, like the next Exorcist of this generation, was completely valid. I absolutely love this movie. I think that this is a movie that not many people are talking about, and they should be. Or it's a mixed bag. I think people are talking about it, but not as much as I think it deserves. I think Ari Aster is hopefully going to be among the next greatest directors that we'll talk about in 50 years from now, and that we'll remember his films fondly and be part of like this new movement of what horror can be. So yeah, that's my history with Hereditary. I guess before we get too far off from into the elevated horror movement, the topic, what is your history, Jay?
I saw the big stand-up cardboard thing for this outside of one of our local theaters here. My wife and I did, and we're like, I wonder what that is. And like, I didn't see the Exorcist line until sometime later. And I was like, I don't know, that looks kind of like a haunted house movie or something. I don't know. We didn't see a trailer or anything. And it just kind of flew by. It came out. I heard people talking about it. That summer was particularly busy, so I didn't go see it, anything like that. But I heard a lot of people just buzzing about it, and they just kept going like, "Oh, you got to see this movie." And so when it came on Amazon, we were like, "Okay, let's sit down and watch this one weekend." And we did. And I remember gasping at certain moments, like, "Oh, that actually got me." But when it came around to the end, like, I was like, where are we going? Because this movie meanders a lot, and we'll talk about that as it gets into it. But I'm watching this, and I realize like I'm really just sort of drawn to this because I'm watching Toni Collette. And I said it before on the Knives Out review, a few weeks ago, with Anthony from Tis the Podcast, that I could watch Toni Collette act the phone book. And I'll stand by that because I generally do just like her in everything that she does. But I realized that I was really paying much more attention to her and watching her craft and do acting stuff than I was really investing in what the movie was giving me. And then it ended, and I remember my wife and I looked at each other going like, "So that was that, huh?" And, I thought, well, okay. And I didn't really spontaneously combust over it, but I also didn't have like a strong negative reaction about it either. I'd thought, okay, that was different, smart, not what I expected. Good twist, but it's a twist I've seen 100 times And I started digging around. I was like, is Shyamalan involved in this in some way? And they just didn't want to put his name on it because everything he touches is garbage, now. And I was wrong about that. But I did come across Ari Aster and started reading a lot of people talking about him and, his next movie is going to be crazy and all this stuff. And I said, okay. And, we'll come back to him and maybe someday we'll talk Midsummer and stuff like that. But I started noticing there was a trend of things happening in Hollywood where they started trying to do the quote classy horror stuff, the elevated horror. And that's when we got like The Witch, a movie I happen to really like, by the way. And then like Get Out, which I think is brilliant. I think Jordan Peele's two movies are both great. I actually think Us is better than Get Out. And then I didn't get into Haunting of Hill House because I know it's kind of a quasi remake of some other source or whatever, but it's sort of in that same vein of things. And then when they did those It remakes, they certainly put it was like, let's put our elevated horror and our Stranger Things nostalgia in a blender. And, we got those and our reviews of those are pretty well documented at this point. More or less work though, I would say. So I'm always down for this when Hollywood decides it's okay to have good horror movies again and like put real people in them and, give them something. And it usually takes an outside studio. And so I started reading about A24. I was like, okay, who are these people? What are they doing? And that, they're taking these auteurs, if you will, Mike, and giving them budgets and access to, big Hollywood actors and stuff like that and production and all this and giving them a platform to do things that, they think are a little cutting edge or a little different. And I'm always game for something like that. But as far as Hereditary goes, like my first, response to it was like, oh, okay, that was a movie. But I didn't really feel strongly about it. And honestly, I'd only watched it once more before watching it for this review. I went back to it sometime after I'd watched Midsummer. And I decided I needed to see this again. And I remember going like, okay, now I think I'm picking up on a lot more. And I do think it is a movie that lends itself to multiple watchings, not only because you see more stuff, but I think you just pick up on, more, there's just more there. The more that you get into it, it's kind of like reading a book. And the first time you read it, you get the story. And then the next time you really get into a character or so. So that's what I think about this. It was sort of my takeaway from this, but had never thought about reviewing it for Film Strip. And I was looking for something to do for Shocktober here. And I knew we had a good variety going because I had Starry Eyes, which is kind of an indie horror thing. And I knew we were going to do the new Halloween. And I knew Ron was going to do The Guest with Mike from Atkins Undisputed. And so I said, well, okay, what can I do? And I came to you with this and you pitched this to me almost immediately. And I was like, okay, well, if he's this passionate about it, then I'm always game when the guest is like super jazzed about something. So it was an interesting experiment to go back to again, because it had been, I saw this in the fall of 2018 and I watched it again, after Midsummer came out. So I haven't thought about it since then. So it's been a couple of years.
I was thinking about when I first saw it. I wish I went back and saw it in a theater because the heightened anxiety that I feel like this movie exudes would have been just amplified in a movie theater with the perfect sound and all that. But I remember thinking like up at like the first 2/3 of the movie is like spectacular. And then once that traditional horror stuff gets in and you're like, it's okay. That's the more traditional stuff that you're like, it's not bad. It's okay. But it's all like that family drama that I think is what specifically draws me to this movie, because there's like sprinklings of like traditional horror stuff in those first 2/3, but it's all about, the acting of, I think specifically Alex Wolff and Toni Collette, of, the cinematography, the little sprinklings of details of what the plot is about. I think Toni Collette is, going to be the big thing we talk about here, but I think the first 2/3 of the movie is like really great. And then it starts to meander, like you said, but yeah, Ari Aster is definitely a director that I think we should definitely keep an eye on. Have you? So I was gonna ask you if you were familiar with anything he did before Hereditary or even after Hereditary. If you'd seen any of his short films from AFI.
I went and looked him up after I saw Midsummer because I was really curious about this guy and kind of what he had going on, and I watched it, and I specifically I watched the one. I'm trying to think of the strange thing about the Johnsons or something.
You could do a whole episode on that alone.
Yeah, and maybe we can do that over in Amateur Auteurs. That might be fun to do. But I saw that, and I saw part of Munchausen, And I thought what I saw there was like, I see why a big studio would give this guy the budget to make a full length feature film. Like, I get it, right? Like he's definitely got a style, and it's borrowing from a lot of things, but that's okay. I mean, that you are what your influences are. And I didn't have a problem with that. And I just remember watching it and thinking, okay, this guy is clearly, making his way in Hollywood or whatever. And I thought, I'm going to read about this guy and he's like 42. He's been doing this for 20 years. Nope. He's only in his 30s. So I was like, wow, he really is like one of the young guns coming up. And so I'm interested in seeing where he goes next. I know his next project is a Joaquin Phoenix thing.
Disappointment Boulevard. Yeah,
it's supposed to be like a multi-year. I don't know. I don't know anything about him. I knew nothing about this. I knew nothing about Midsummer going into him. And I kind of, for people like this, I'm like, you know what? I think it's better just to walk in cold and just see what it is. Like it's really a lot of the way I approach Nolan flicks too. And we've talked a lot about him. Is I just kind of like walking in and just letting those wash over me because I know I'm in for something I'm going to enjoy because I'm in the bag for the guy. Ari Aster, I'm real curious to see where he goes next. And like I said, well, maybe we can circle around and talk about his shorts, but I was not familiar with him beforehand. I went back and sought a couple out afterward because I thought it would be an interesting experiment. I'm assuming you've had some background with him.
Yeah. So I looked up the short films after Midsommar. I think I saw Hereditary and Midsommar like pretty like closely to one another. So I was like, well, let me see where these things are, because Brian mentioned the strange things about the Johnsons, and he told me the basic plot. And I guess just for the listeners, because what he told me is what made me immediately want to go search this. Where Strange Things About the Johnsons, it's a traditional, I guess, suburban family, African American. However, the son has been sexually molesting the father from a very young age, and so the short film takes place when the son is like in his late 20s, early 30s, and just that dynamic of the relationship. And it's such an impactful short film because I think just that tagline, you're like, what? Like how it's like they made Lolita a movie, and I feel like it's the same thing as like, how do they make this a movie or a short film? And I've seen Bo, I've seen Munchausen, Cis La Vie, I've seen, which I liked all of those. The only one I really didn't like was TDF Really Works. I think that's more in vein of I actually don't really know how to classify that. I just remember thinking like it was so totally different from whatever he was doing. It kind of reminded me of like a College Humor type thing, and I wouldn't be surprised if they produced it. I just remember thinking it was very weird for just being weird sakes. Like Bo is very strange, but it's in like a David Lynch kind of way. And this is French, so I'm butchering it. Like Cis La Vie, I think is an interesting character study of this homeless man just giving this like monologue to the camera. And then Munchausen is just, a tragic story of Munchausen syndrome, which is from the mother to the son. And it was just, and I think a lot of, and that's where you start to see his the themes of his work. He loves dealing with tragedy, especially family dynamics and tragedy affecting families. You see that obviously in Hereditary, and I know he says Midsommar is more. It's a post-apocalyptic breakup story. I know he said it. He's the director. He wrote it. I completely disagree with that. I think Midsommar is more about finding families and finding yourself coming from a broken family, tragedy, and finding yourself in a new community. And that's, a topic for another day. But there are these themes that are coming in his work that I'm seeing in his shorts and the films that he's made.
Oh no, completely. I think Ari Aster is obsessed with upper crust, upper middle class, above families, and their, for lack of a better way of saying it, everything you pull out of them in counseling sessions. Like he loves the mental anguish that people go through in times of grief. Specifically, that's kind of his big thing, is how do people deal with and process and work through grief? at different times. And I think that, I mean, particularly this movie is hinging upon all of that. And then he likes to layer on the weird stuff as part of it. And I think some of that comes from Lynch. Some of that comes from, you know, the era he's grown up in, and the, you know, the kind of the things that scare him or whatever. You can see, like I say, you can see the genesis of some of these ideas in what his 2 feature films have been so far, in those shorts. And it's definitely what this movie's about. I mean, this movie is a heavy drama. Like, if you took out all of the demon worship, supernatural stuff in this, what you have is a very cold but very compelling family drama of dealing with grief and loss. You know, like, in some ways, like, it's almost like I wonder, it would be an editor's exercise to, could you cut up this movie and just make a drama out of it? You wouldn't have an ending, I guess, but you'd have to, I don't know what you do with that. But yeah, I don't know. That he is definitely obsessed with the family drama, as it were, in this. And then in letting actors breathe and do what actors like to do, which is chew dialogue, man. And I've met a lot of them over the last year or so in particular. And it's a neat skill to be able to absorb yourself in a character and to run lines and just to find emotion in words and let it come through your face when you don't have 1,000 special effects going on around you and stuff like that. And so I don't know. I find that exercise to be neat, and that's certainly something this movie hinges a lot on too.
Yeah, and I think like that theme that you're talking about, like letting actors be actors and like really focusing on the story, is going into this idea of the elevated horror movement that we've been kind of seeing in the last, I'd say, I guess the last 7 years or so. I'm trying to think of the movie that, to me, I feel like sparked it. I mean, obviously you're going to get these outliers here and there from, you know, the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. But for me, just as a past, like just being a moviegoer and seeing and being fans of these types of movies, I feel like it was something like, it was either The Babadook or It Follows that kind of started this movement, that, or maybe when people started noticing it, when the horror has subtext. And obviously films have had, you know, horror films have had subtext with I think the great horror films that, you know, we still talk about, for some reason, like The Thing keeps coming up, you know, the subtext of like the paranoia and not being able to trust people amidst this monster movie. I guess I just watched that, and that's just like really the only thing that's coming to me.
Well, I mean, think about something like Silence of the Lambs, you know, and the obsession that we had with the Hannibal Lecter character for, you know, decades. That falls in that show. Hannibal is very much elevated horror. It's very horror, but it's very elevated horror. But it all comes from detective stories crossing over with the Michael Myers trope and stuff. Like, what if you took the low rent slasher and you gave it a real classy sheen? You know, like that's what these things try to do. Or if you know, the root of all of it is always the paranormal. Like, we're touching the evil, the essence of, you know, the devil versus God and all of that, or we're touching into, you know, the supernatural in some way, a haunting or something like that. Like, I think that's always been around. Like, you go back and watch some of those old cheesy Vincent Price movies, man. Like, and those are some of my favorites to watch this time of year during October and stuff. They're kind of quaint, but they're also really creepy. Like, there's some messed up stuff going on in the original House on Haunted Hill and all that kind of stuff. So I dig that. I think it's cool. It's fun how Hollywood falls in and out of love with it. And it's hard to ever pinpoint exactly when it started or when it stopped, but we're definitely in a moment when that is getting attention. Those movies are getting acclaimed. They're being made, and it's influencing other stuff, because now you see, you know, Candyman got a remake, and that is not your, you know, older brother's Candyman. I can tell you that right now. That movie's got a lot to say. Whether you want to hear it or not. I mean, it's coming for you. And even that, you know, that Halloween 2018, before it became the kind of weird action movie it becomes in the third act, and what this new one looks like it's going to be, that movie was saying a lot about a whole lot of trauma, you know, before it got into doing its horror stuff. So I think we're just in that moment right now where people are doing that. And let's think about it too, as a society. It's never been more out like in our conscience to deal with your mental issues, particularly after the last year and a half, 2 years of the pandemic. Like that, we're talking about mental health in a way that is incredibly healthy, one, but in ways we never have in my lifetime.
Yeah, and I love that we're in this elevated horror movement, or if you want to call it that. I think I was reading some articles about this elevated horror term, and I think there's some weird backlash against it, because I think my interpretation was that some might think that it's like this pretentious, like, oh, elevated horror. It's obviously in response to the last 3 or 4 decades of just slasher films from, I mean, obviously evolution, but definitely from, the late 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. I think all this is in response to that, where it's just like mindless violence, the Friday the 13th, the Nightmare on Elm Streets, the Hostels, the Saws, where it's just what they call quote unquote torture porn, and it's just like gratuitous violence for gratuitous violence sakes. But I love, because I feel like horror is that avenue that it can reach everyone. Like everyone knows that primal idea of fear, and I feel like the best horror stories are those that can get that subtext across. So like what you were mentioning, Get Out, the Witch, The Lighthouse, Robert Eggers, Jordan Peele. I think these directors and these stories are doing really great. Mike Flanagan, who did Haunting of Hill House. Hill House, that's a whole, I was planning on doing an episode on Hill House, and then I just got lost in the sauce because I didn't know how to talk about it. But I mean, Hill House is good in its own right, but I think Bly Manor is way better and way more coherent and way more focused. But I think it's great that these can be easily accessible. But it's interesting too, because I feel like you see these elevated horror films is that critics love these movies for the most part, and then audiences are either lukewarm or they don't like it at all. In the case of Hereditary, it's a very mixed bag of what average moviegoers think. And I think it's because they saw the trailer, they saw, oh, this is going to be the next Omen, let's go in, and they weren't expecting to be bombarded with family tragedy and these heavy themes of families not communicating with each other. And they sit there and like, wait a minute, maybe they just been conditioned over the last 30, 40 years of like, no, this is what horror is. And they're like, wait, I don't know what to think about this now. And I think that is beautiful, because it's making people think and question of like what is scary. Because I think the middle of the film, or not the middle, like the big twist where the rug is pulled from the audience's feet, that it literally makes you question of like, well, what is, like, this is scary. Like watching Toni Collette act, watching Alex Wolff, just the relationship of the family, like this is real life scary. Like this is scarier than any ghost that is in Paranormal Activity or any like or Freddy, Jason, any like mythical monster. Like this is real life, and that's why this is so scary.
Well,
this happens.
I think it's a lot of things right now, and it's just where we are in society. Like I said, we're talking about our mental health and our issues and our trauma more openly than we ever have, and I think that's a good thing. I want to be on record as to say that. But what it has also done is it has conditioned our audiences to, and why an audience might have a lukewarm reaction to that is you go to a movie a lot of times to do what? Escape. And if you go and you're like, wait a minute, that's just like what I'm dealing with at home, or what I had to deal with back in my hometown, or this, that, and like it just lands the wrong way at the wrong time, like it can be, that can be a lot. It can be rough, and that can make it for an experience that in a theater, you walk out and go like, it's all right, whatever. And again, I'll go back to what I said about this movie in the outset. I don't think it's one that's meant to be seen once and then just sort of like, okay, that's in my pile now. Like, I don't think Ari Aster made a movie like that. And that's a gamble, because getting people twice in a theater is, that's an event thing, like a Marvel thing or something like Star Wars, something like that these days. People just don't do that anymore. And a lot of it now, because the time between theater and getting it in your home is so much shorter. And it's just only getting shorter and shorter. And I think we've just crossed that bridge now, that a lot of people, they may not experience something in the theater until they experience it at home. And you got to hit them right out of the gate. And, it depends on what you're in the mood for. And I think before we get any further, we need to do a quick plot summary.
Yeah, I was going to say, as fun as this is, maybe this can be a film strip sessions or something, like a bonus pod. Because we could sit here for another hour just talking about this. But I was gonna say, like, let's get into the movie. I do want to say, before we get into this discussion, I want to echo like every review that I've listened to, watched. Like, I mean, the movie is almost 3 years old, 2.5 years old. If you haven't seen the movie by now, please go watch the movie, because I think this is a film, like the twists and the turns and the rug being pulled out from under you. If you haven't seen it, like, please experience it organically. Like, this has to be experience. This is like the Psycho moment, and it's amazing that it hasn't been ruined. Like, this isn't a twist that everyone knows about. Like, so if you haven't seen the movie, please go watch the movie. At least until the part that where the rug gets that's pulled out. And I don't want to give you any more hints because you're gonna know. But yeah, that's just my thing. It's just watch the movie if you haven't seen it. Like, that's just my plea. Like, please see the movie before, because you have to experience this organically.
Yeah, because I'm going to tell you right now, I cut this down as short as I could get it, because I'm cutting to the chase, because I figure we're going to walk through a lot of this stuff anyway. But I'm just going to tell you, here is what actually is going on in Hereditary. I want to tell you now, what I'm about to read to you and tell you is not exactly how it is presented to you, but it is the ultimate conclusion. And I'm doing it this way so that we can talk about how they get us there. Annie Graham, this is Toni Collette's character, her mother Ellen dies and leaves Annie and her family to deal with their strained relationship. When Annie's daughter Charlie is killed in an auto accident where her son Peter was driving, this sends Annie into an emotional tailspin. Annie meets with a woman named Joan who promises she can perform a seance to contact Charlie, as she has contacted her dead son the same way. But after this seance, supernatural events begin to haunt the Graham family, and Annie continues to unravel more and more. We learn that Joan and Ellen were actually a part of a cult attempting to summon the demon Payman into the body of a male heir in the family. Payman had actually settled into Charlie's body, which is why she presented as such a tomboy all the time, but wasn't satisfied and has then pursued Peter ever since Charlie's death. In fact, it's pretty obvious that the cult, and under the direction of Payman, caused Charlie's death in a roundabout way. Every supernatural occurrence was orchestrated by Ellen, Joan, and the cult. Annie's husband spontaneously combusts during an argument, and Annie herself is briefly possessed before she cuts off her own head with piano wire. Peter witnesses this and jumps out of a window, maybe to his own death, maybe to knock himself out, but either way, it allows Payman to take over his body, and he joins the rest of the cult in Charlie's treehouse, where they bow to worship him as credits roll. And that's the straight through, here's what happens. This is what this movie is really about. How they get us there is an entirely different journey. And that's what we're going to spend the next little while talking about here. And I think the way to do it, really, rather than plot by plot, because this movie, it really is just a set of scenes and things, is to take it all from Toni Collette's point of view, Annie Graham, because she is our character in this movie. Everyone else services what she is doing in some way or drives her in some way. And I think, again, Toni Collette for me is a good entry point for anything, because she can play everything, and she kind of has. And I gotta say, watching her and just the little details in the stuff she does, Mike, she's a miniatures artist. So she's constantly creating these dioramas, which flow in and out. Like, it's almost like a Kubrick shot of rooms. And then all of a sudden we're in that room and all these things. And she's constantly sort of channeling her emotion into that. She recreates her daughter's death scene in one of them, which is horrendous. And all this other stuff, everything is sort of into the lens that she lives in this incredibly encapsulated, kind of boxed in world by choice, we find out, because her upbringing was incredibly fraught with emotional trauma, from her father's death to her brother's suicide, her mother's eccentricities, And we get all of that in that opening piece where she's speaking at her mother's funeral. And she talks about how, like, I didn't have a great relationship with my mother. I didn't even know she knew this many people. You know, there's all these people in the room. And if you're paying attention, what you realize later is all those people are part of the cult. But you don't know that going in. And you're just watching this woman kind of deal with, I'm supposed to be sad right now because everything tells me my mother's dead. I should be sad, but I'm not. My kids aren't. My husband surely isn't. I don't really know what to do with this. You know, we get to see her talk about it at a trauma group too, and how, you know, weird their relationship was. Remember, weird, how strained it was. And that's why I say, like, you know, you strip out the supernatural part and you've got a heck of a family drama going on here. And Toni Collette is the gold piece of all of this for me. Again, I could watch her do this and do these scenes where she has these frantic line dumps over and over again because she just goes in and out of it like turning on a switch. It's really cool to watch an actor do that.
Yeah, I can't. This movie doesn't work without her. I don't think I mean, yeah, there's tons of talented actresses, but I don't think, like, this is her role. You know, it's like, for me, it's like thinking of like Forrest Gump without Tom Hanks. Like, it just wouldn't work because Tom Hanks is that character, and this is Toni Collette plays Annie, like, to the T. And that's like there's so many details in this movie that, like, when you get that second viewing, you start seeing everything. And, you know, I mean, I have my notes, like, just plot by plot, which, I mean, we won't get into that, but yeah, definitely, like, this opening, like, it just sets the scene and it starts sprinkling from the first 5-10 minutes. You know, we open up with the obituary, setting the tone. I think that's setting the tone for just, like, death in families immediately. I love the box framing and the diorama, both organically, of just, you know, we pan, we see the first shot of the movie, we see the treehouse, we pan to the right and we see all her artwork studio, and we pan closer to the house and it goes into Peter's room. But even I was noticing throughout key moments of this film, there's always a locked camera, like it's a diorama. I noticed it specifically after the dinner sequence fight, where Toni Collette and Alex Wolff just go just mean-spirited, like, disdain.
That is, like, as somebody who's a big fan of plays, by the way, I felt like I was like, oh, Ari Aster must love plays, because this is the kind of stuff that actors get to do in plays where they just claw each other's eyes out. Like, there's a great scene in a play called it's the Last Days of Judas Iscariot. And it's all about a trial. It's a long story, but there's an attorney and Pontius Pilate go at each other in a couple of scenes that very similar to this, where they are literally clawing each other's eyes out with words. And I love that. I'm sitting there watching her just spew that at him, and then he just react to it the way that you're supposed to, like, just absorbing it, softly dealing with it instead of yelling back. You know, it's so neat. There's all of that going on. And then you also realize, like, we're talking about people that are being possessed by a cult. Like, that cannot be lost on this either, because on one hand, like, again, you strip away the supernatural part and you could almost laugh at, like, how ridiculous some of this gets and how overly dramatic it is. But when you lay that sheen on it, and you've got Colin Stetson's ethereal droning strings, and Pavel Porzanelski's is the cinematographer. The way he shoots it, I love that you call out his lock shots, because most of the time, what do we want to try to do? We want to swing around everything. There's a few of those shots in this movie, but he didn't really get off into doing that until the third act. Like, this movie is mostly locked down until everything becomes unhinged.
Yeah, and it really keeps you in that moment. Like, you're like, the audience is uncomfortable and you can't look away. And I loved, like I said, those moments of, after those key moments, like I said, after the dinner argument, the camera's locked and she just walks away, and then it's almost like, okay, she's going to go paint this now, because she's going to make a miniature of this, because as we see, she just starts making miniatures of everything. And going back to Toni Collette's acting, is I love how how she doesn't make much sense. I love, like, one of my favorite moments when she first goes to the grief, I lost a loved one meeting, and they're like, okay, we have a few minutes left. Does anyone else want to share? So she gets there one late, and then she sits down, doesn't say a word, and then she like kind of meekly raises her hand and says, oh, I don't even know if I should be here. And then she just releases, and it's word vomit. And some might think that this is just exposition, but I think it's really building the character of Annie, of just all this pent up frustration and just like confusion of what to do. And here's where we get the whole idea of,
It's
the father starved himself because of mental illness. Oh, my brother hung himself because he blamed my mom because she was putting
people
voices in his head, or
right.
people in him. And we had a no contact rule. Like, it's literally everything is just spelled out here, or just exposition dump. But what's great, I just think the acting sells it, because she just goes from like scoffing at the idea of being there to just complete word vomit to these complete strangers.
And again, I'll tell you, like, that's the thing about, like, it's so cool about this. I call this like the introvert's horror dream, because you don't want to do it. You don't want to unburden, but when you turn the faucet on, sometimes you can't turn it off. And that's what I felt like she was. She just got a few little drips out, and then all of a sudden, boom, here it all came. And it's only in retrospect that you realize she lays out the entire movie for you in that moment. You know what is going to happen. You know everything that is going to happen after that speech. If you go back and listen to it, she foretells all of it. But it's like you say, it's in such a word vomit that you're like, is she just unburdening what is going on? I'm trying to pick up on this, what's happened, and it goes by subtly, and I think that's one of the hallmarks of the quote elevated horror movement is there has to be a lot of subtlety in these things. And I want to say something now. That's probably a studio decision to say, like, it's Exorcist for the new generation or whatever. This movie has absolutely nothing to do with The Exorcist. The Exorcist is about as subtle as a fork to the face. Like, that movie's not subtle at all. Like, it tells you exactly what it is from the get-go with that ominous music. This movie is way more under the table, way more trying to get you to do what the group was trying to do for her, right? To get you relaxed. So that you open up the door, because that's how the devil wins, right? It's not by bombarding you necessarily. It's by fooling you into thinking that, oh, it's all good, and then the hooks are in.
Yeah, there's that. There's this moment, and then there's the other moment. I don't know if it comes before or after the sequence when Charlie's in her room, obviously most affected of this family by the grandmother's death for obvious reasons at the end of the movie. But coming back and seeing this when she says, well, like, who's going to take care of me when you die? And it's like, I think I wrote down these quotes where, like, in the moment, they mean nothing. You were her favorite. Only she would feed you. She wished I was a boy. Who's going to take care of me? Who's going to take care of me? Oh, well, I'm going to take care of you. Well, what happens when you die? And is that clairvoyant, I know, like, I sort of know what's going to happen, but in the beginning of the movie, when you don't know what's going on, it's so innocuous. You don't know. It's this innocent little thing. Oh, it's a child who is very affected by this. But then at the end of the movie, those are the two moments where the movie is entirely spelled out. You know that Toni Collette will be dead at the end of this movie, and then we're setting up everything when she just word vomits everything.
And that brings me to the first question I had, Mike, and I wanted to ask you this, because it's only in retrospect that I've kind of picked up on this now. And honestly, after 3 viewings of this movie, is we know Payman inhabits Charlie, but this time watching it, I got it in my head. I'm like, I don't think Charlie's ever Charlie. I think it's Payman the whole way. But it's disappointed that it's in the female host because it wants to be in a male host. Like, that's the whole thing. Am I reading that wrong? Or is that a fair reading of this? Is that there is no Charlie. There's only Payman speaking through Charlie's body.
Oh, yeah. No, I always took that Payman was always inhabiting Charlie, especially, we get those because we get those later scenes of, like, the dreams, or is it a dream sequence? I take it as a dream sequence when Toni Collette is talking to Peter and says, oh, essentially, like, I wanted to abort you. I wanted to miscarry you. I never wanted to have you. And one way or another, went through with the pregnancy because it was meant to be, whether the mother was influenced there, but then, she was it seemed like from conception that the mother was involved and then wanting to breastfeed. There's also those details of the, like that green plant. You can see it like when at Jones, when she drinks the tea and she pulls it out, but also when there's a quick shot of Ellen feeding baby Charlie, the green plant is at the bottom of the bottle. I don't know where that comes in there, but I always took that as like it's some sort of satanic plant, whatever.
Yeah, like
connections. Like I always thought that Payman was it was like Rosemary's Baby. Like he was always there.
Well, see, I took it as this. Charlie has that flashback sequence for us where she walks, out of her house into the field or whatever, and you see Grandma in that ring of fire or whatever. And again, only this time did I kind of realize, I'm like, I think that's where Charlie died, like quote unquote. And when Payman got into Charlie, I think that's the latent memories of how did I get in this body again? Like that's when Chucky did the Ooga Booga speech or whatever. Like, I think that's when that happened. And we're just being told that in subtlety. Now, again, I could be completely wrong about that, but that's my reading of it is we're seeing that because I think at that point, and what we have to know is that Payman is orchestrating all of this stuff. It can't directly like go, you will do this, but it can move enough things around to make what it wants happen. Right. And I guess we should call him he, because they do personify it as such. And what we're looking at, I think there's Payman realizing like, okay, so I got to go to this party. So I got to make sure I get a hold of some nuts so I can go into anaphylactic shock because that's a Charlie thing. And through that, I can, kill this body off once and for all. And then that way I can be free and I can have Peter. And that's sort of the moment when it's deciding that or whatever. I don't know. It's really creepy to think about. The demon now becomes your character and you have to think about that. And look, Millie Shapiro gives a startling performance in the few scenes she is in this movie. And you can't not see all of the just stuff going on behind those eyes, man. It is a creep fest.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere, but it was like a behind the scenes thing where Ari Aster asked Alex Wolff and Millie Shapiro to go out in character, like as brother and sister, and I think Millie Shapiro was just like this awkward, quiet, like not knowing how to interact, and Alex Wolff just played with it and was like, oh, like it really got him into character. But it's funny just how they really tried to get into that mindset of like this socially awkward, it definitely confused kid, and then Alex Wolff, who plays Peter, this like
he's a friggin' pop
teenager,
singer, for goodness sakes. I mean,
yeah, Naked Brothers Band. I'm glad you brought that up because I remember watching this first time and thinking like, where have I seen this kid? I mean, I saw like Jumanji, Into the Jungle or Welcome to the Jungle before, but it never clicked of like, where have I seen this kid? And then I was like, and then I looked him up. I was like, oh my God, he's the pop kid, the kid singer, the Naked Brothers Band. When I was a kid, that was popular. So I was like, oh my God, this is the same guy. And he did phenomenal. I love seeing him in the work he's been doing. It was just awesome to see.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's this whole thing is, Peter is a very gregarious, kind of outgoing. He's definitely popular. He's got the cute girl that gives him the eye and sends him the, sassy texts or whatever. He smokes weed with his buddies. I mean, and he's clearly like getting by in school or whatever. He's got a pretty good setup at home because I don't know if Toni Collette is selling those, Annie's selling those miniatures or whatever, or if that's just her friggin' hobby because Stephen Gabriel Byrne, the psychiatrist, which friggin' Kaiser Soze is your psychiatrist. You better find a new psychiatrist. But I mean, really, like that is it's such a neat setup to see because you couldn't have like picked four people. One, Toni Collette and Gabriel Byrne are an interesting match together. You're like, okay, like maybe if I turn my head sideways, I can kind of see this happening. But their two kids look nothing like either one of them. And I kind of think that's the inside joke of Ari Aster here is that neither of these kids look like their parents. It's on purpose, and I don't know. That's just funny. Like I I meet students all the time, the universities I work at, and now I'm at the age now where their parents are my age, essentially, some of them, and I meet them, and I'm like, I can see, you're definitely your mother, and all these kind of things like that. And then the number of my coworkers that have small children, toddlers, and you can see their parents' features in them, and I'm like, they couldn't have cast this with people who looked more different than the primary actors if they tried. But I think that's on purpose. I don't think that anything in this movie is done just arbitrarily.
Oh, yeah, totally. I completely agree. Everything seems extremely thought out, which it's very much like the cult members. Everything is thought out almost to not almost, literally to a T. And and I guess we can talk, like when you mentioned it earlier with payment, like, oh, like the nut allergy, you have to get the nuts. They set it up early in the movie. The moment they said, oh, EpiPen, I was like, okay, watching the movie, you're like, I mean, this is a conversation. Like, I have a shellfish allergy, and I just had a vacation at the time of this recording in Acadia National Park, Bar Harbor, Maine, where lobsters are galore. So me and my girlfriend were talking about, okay, I got my EpiPen, I got it here, we got to disinfect everything. So like, these are real conversations, but in the context of a movie, like, that nut allergy is going to come up, and boy, does it come up again. And that's where
Chekhov's nut allergy. Yeah,
oh my God, yeah,
real.
Ooh, that's for damn sure. But and that was one of the things when I first saw this movie. So the context. Charlie and Peter go to a high school party, clearly like a high school party, not meant for 13-year-olds. Annie is insisting that that they both go, that they're gonna meet everyone. Charlie's gonna hang out with other kids, quote unquote, but it's 16, 17, 18-year-old smoking dope, drinking, whatever. And she goes anywhere. She doesn't want to be there. And they're making chocolate cake with nuts. Charlie eats the cake, has an anaphylactic shock, get in the car, and they race off. And I guess we'll talk about the scene. And like you mentioned in the plot summary, Peter swerves he's high from smoking. He's anxiety-induced adrenaline pumping because his sister is literally dying in front of him. And in that stupor, in these, I forget what state this takes place in. It seems like
Utah.
in Oregon. It's Utah. Yeah, just this open state of blackness, and then there's a deer in the road. He swerves, and her head gets decapitated on a telephone pole. And we can get to that scene in a second. Let's just talk about this, because I feel like what follows after is that 1-2 punch, and this is the first punch. Just everything is so planned to the point of, we're going to put the deer here. He's going to, she's going to have the reaction. He's going to come here. All this is going to happen. He's going to swerve, and this will happen. Charlie will die and release from the mortal bounds. And at first that bothered me, but then I was thinking, like, when you know the movie and you hear these lines of, especially from Charlie saying, like, well, what happens when you die? And then the seance and stuff, like, there's definitely some sort of clairvoyance going on that you're like, okay, there's literally demons at play here. So it's not too far fetched to think, like, they definitely got a hint that, like, everything is orchestrated, everything is predetermined. This is going to happen in the exact way it needs to. And I guess leading up, like, that scene in itself is masterful filmmaking. Everything from just the quick setups of this is what's happening, just the nonchalant of the situation, to the slow progressive wheezing of Charlie, and then Charlie walking and saying, oh, my throat's getting bigger, and then the slow, the drums picking up, and then it's just building anxiety, and then just the acting of Alex Wolff, just this manic, like, oh, we're almost there, don't worry, Charlie. And then Charlie's just this gasping, wheezing, like, she's clutching her throat, opens the window, sticks her head out just for desperation. And then we get the literal thud. The rug is ripped out from under the audience. And this is the moment that Brian and his girlfriend screamed. And rightly so. It hits you. It's a gut punch. And I think when I first saw it, I audibly gasped, because you weren't expecting that. And then at that point, you're like, oh my God, she's dead. Where's this? What's going on? Like, you just feel lost. You're like, you're in shock with Peter, not to the level of comatose, but you're like, I'm lost. I don't know what's going on in this movie anymore.
See, up to that point, I had just started, and I can remember the first time seeing this movie, thinking this. I'm like, okay, so how is Charlie the devil? And then, I had already decided, like, Charlie's the evil thing. This is clear. So, how's this going to work out and manifest? And then when her head gets knocked off by a telephone pole, I did the same thing your brother did. I went, I was like, whoa, I did not see that coming at all. There's another time I gasped later on when Gabriel Byrne turns into a fire. I did not see that happening at that moment, and when that goes down, but and this movie's staged to do that, because the first 15 minutes or so of this, like, we got a lot of family drama. We got the spewing of at the support group and all this stuff, and we've sort of got this. There's clearly tension between Mom and Peter, and all this other stuff, and then you see this go down, and Alex Wolff in this scene. And it's not the only time he gets to do it in the movie. We talked about the dinner scene thing. His face, the look of just complete shock. And, Mike, you work in healthcare and have seen this. When someone goes into shock, like, it's a strange, weird sense of calm over someone who inside, like, their whole mind is just firing a billion different directions in a row. And they just can't do anything anymore. Just can't think. And what gets me about the scene is you see him and you see him in the car and he won't turn around. He knows. He's like, okay, all right. And then he just turns around and he just drives away. And he drives home and he just goes, and you see that head where they linger on that one a good while. But Toni Collette's guttural just wailing the next morning, and we're close on Peter's face the whole time, and he's just not moving at all. I was completely thrown off. I'm like, what's happening here? Like, what is he just in shock? Is he possessed? What's going on? And to be honest with you, you don't know. Like, you don't really know until the movie gets going for a little bit what's happened, because it takes its time to let that big act turn sit with you.
Yeah, and where that first punch is definitely like a Muhammad Ali jab. This second one, when Toni Collette, when you see that the face of Peter, and you just hear, "Oh, I'm going out," and you hear the first door open, you hear the front door open, then you hear it close, and then she walks to the car, like, oh my God, like, she's gonna find the body, like, oh my God, the kid, like, Charlie's still back there, and you hear that door open, and then you just hear this, like you said, this guttural, primal scream, and then it cuts to her in her room, just like, oh my God, it hurts. I need to die. And she just starts screaming Charlie's name, and the camera just slowly pans to Peter standing outside the bedroom, listening to his mother moan and wail and just scream that I want to die, that I can't handle this. And then we cut to the amazing, beautifully or not, it's just the framing of another diorama of the blocked fixed angle of the coffin being lowered into the ground, and we are with Charlie, or at least the body of Charlie, when we see the ground underneath. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what's going on with this movie? And yeah, and just like Alex Wolff, again, kudos with that look of shock. I'm a NICU nurse. I work with preemie babies. I work in a level 3 NICU. So we work with some pretty sick kids. We're a big respiratory hospital. And I've seen that look of shock on some parents, especially when their babies are the 24 week, the 28, especially the micro preemies. It's just this look of shock of, that's my baby. And there's wires, there's IVs in them, in their hands, in their belly, but like their umbilical stumps. There's, they're hooked up to either an oscillator, like a breathing ventilator, or like on some sort of CPAP or something. And I've seen that look of shock of just like, what is happening? We've had some parents faint when they come into the room. And when I see Alex Wolff's Alex Wolff's face as Peter here, I'm like, he's nailed it. Like that direction paired with the acting, you nailed it. And then we get into this beautifully tragic sequence that is definitely echoed in Midsommar, but I don't think like that opening sequence with Midsommar does not top this moment, because here we have the context of everything. Midsommar just kind of opens with a tragedy, but this is just you're in it, and then like you don't know what's going to happen, and it really puts you into that moment of, as an audience, like, I don't know where this movie's going, but also it's like, wow, like what next? As many people find themselves in these situations of experiencing extreme tragedy, like what next? And then we're just along for the ride.
Yeah, well, I mean, we follow Peter and Annie after this, where Peter, obviously racked with guilt. He's reclusive. He's just sort of kind of following inside of himself. He's trying to smoke weed with his buddies underneath the bleachers, and he starts having the same reaction Charlie did. You realize he's having a stress reaction, and because of the guilt and things like that. And then you have that unbelievably great bit of acting again, where Toni Collette just unloads on him at the dinner table, and you got Gabriel Byrne trying to stop that from happening and mediate between them, but he's also trying to be calm. And she goes from just complete 100 miles an hour at him to she's sitting back down, she's quiet, and then she just gets up and walks away, and he's just sitting there just sort of absorbed with the fact that she's unloaded on him, and he doesn't know what to say, because he's trying to get her to say anything, because he knows she wants to unload on him, and maybe part of him needs it too, so he can process his own grief and stuff. And what I'm saying about that is all this happens, and you're going like, I thought this movie was about possession and stuff, and it is, but it takes this 25-minute detour to become this kind of high rent Lifetime movie. Because Annie gets a friend, and the great Anne Dowd, who I think everyone now knows is a monster from Handmaid's Tale.
Yep.
But just a great character actor, and can play anything. And she's so good in this as the friend, because Annie goes to the grief support thing again, and she's getting ready to drive away. She's like, I can't do this. And Joan runs her down. And she's like, oh, I remember you from months ago. Is everything okay? And they strike it up. And what you think is like she's making a friend. What you realize later is like Joan is setting the stage for what has to happen next. It's all part of the great plan. It's what makes this movie kind of fun to revisit after right? Is when do they not know? And you realize why. Because sometimes when that happens in a movie, Mike, like you go back and watch, like, man, these characters are stupid. Like, you should have realized that. Like, there's no place at which Annie could have figured this out. Like, there's no way she would have known, because she didn't have the relationship with her mother to know, right? So she had no idea what was happening, that she was being set up, that she's being marked. But we go through all of that, and we go through the little seance with the chalkboard and the sun and all this. And you have to ask yourself on the back end, like, is that even real, or is Joan just making that shit up because it's what you do to get the mark reeled in? And part of me is like, I kind of think it is real, because in every lie there's a little bit of truth, right? And it just makes the story better, but maybe not. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But it's one of those. It's just one of those things that after you've sort of gone through this movie, and then when the movie kicks into high gear in the back half of the second act and into the third act, that you realize, like, man, in those slow moments, they sure did tell us a whole lot, and we just sort of let it wash over us. And that's the unnerving part of this movie, is that it knows when to really gear down and tell you a lot, but make you realize you're not realizing I'm telling you everything that's about to happen to these people again. And then you go see it happen the next 30 minutes.
Yeah, and I love like these slow moments too. I mean, especially when you see the deleted scenes, there's so many more like drawn out moments, but there's so much that like what's in the movie are the trimmed down sequences. Like when Toni Collette is sleeping in the treehouse, there's this whole thing that Peter couldn't sleep, and then he was going to go in the treehouse and see her and then fall and like hurt his leg. But we don't need any of that. We get these quick glances of Peter not sleeping, Toni Collette's in the treehouse, and it cuts back. Like, we're just cutting back and forth of how distant both these characters are. And what I love about Joan especially with like this whole seance thing is, we have this whole thing with the mail, the shot, the square shot of the mail, and then it's in the mailbox. Then someone, you don't see who, slips in this pamphlet of a seance, being, oh, we hope that I took this as, let's hope they see this. She'll come, and then we'll work the magic there. Oh, she doesn't come. Okay, Joan, now it's your turn. We got to get the seance. We have to have them invite Payman back into the house. But I just love, like, it's again those subtle details of, okay, we're gonna, because that pamphlet is never brought up. It's the seance. Now it's like, okay, that plan didn't work. Joan, your turn to go in and set everything in motion. Like, there's always a plan in place, or there's always contingencies if something doesn't work. And I have to admit, once like the more traditional stuff starts coming in, as entertaining as like the seance and all the, like, both seances are, I'm that's not what's interesting to me. I thought that the family drama, Toni Collette and Alex Wolff just going at each other at the dinner table, or her grief-stricken wails. That's what's like scary to me. That's what's interesting to me. This seance stuff is like, okay, like this is what I kind of was expecting at this point.
I look at that seance bit, like the whole seance piece, is just to jump in real quick, Mike. I look at that and I'm like, that's what the classy Paranormal Activity would have been like. Like if they had ever really done one up without just being reliant upon noises and jump scares and stuff like that. Like that's how to do that and make it unnerving and weird. Because I mean, you see Peter in that moment, like clearly they've repaired some bit of their relationship, because he starts calling her mommy and crying and he's just upset. And you see, like, it's also the first time you realize on the back end that Annie's possessed for the first time at that moment. And you think she's possessed by Charlie, which you realize she's possessed by Payman, and she's talking out of her head, and she's we think she's talking out of her head. She's saying those words, and like Gabriel Byrne's like, I don't even know what language that is, and they're going back and forth about it. And only in retrospect, you realize you've got to say all those words for this to work. So Payman's like, fine, damn it, I'll do it. And he just grabs her and uses up enough energy for her to spit out those words. And they have to throw water on her to knock her out of it. And I like that though. I hear what you're saying. It's like, that wasn't as compelling as some of the family stuff. And I agree with you there, but I think this isn't where the movie loses me when it becomes horror express. I'll say that there's a point when that happens. We'll talk about it when it happens, but this isn't it for me. I'm like, no, I'm digging this. And I dig the little subtle bits here too, where she sees, Charlie's sketchbook drawing Peter, and all this, and she throws it in the fire and she starts to burn with it, and she goes back to Joan's apartment, and Joan ain't there, but all of Charlie's like little handmade weird toys are there, which, how did that happen? Like it starts, now we're starting to like put up these big question marks of what the hell is going on in this, movie, as everything is starting to unravel and it gets weirder and weirder, at school and everything else.
Yeah, it definitely starts to get really bizarre, especially when when Payman starts becoming more and more powerful, like with those like the pulsating lights, as those become more and more frequent. I do like that imagery and how it's like leading Peter, but I mean, we do get that, like that bit. I love the line. It's at the dinner scene when Toni Collette just screams like, I wrote it down. Where is it? No one admits anything that they've done. No, you can't take responsibility for anything. But it's like, she can, start screaming that at Peter for not taking responsibility, but there's a lot that she's responsible for that she's not taking responsibility for.
Oh yeah, and that confession, when she's talked about like what she would do when she has that dream where she's in front of Peter's bed and she's telling all the time she
with
tried
the turpentine and everything,
and
like
that's
stuff. Something she's not talking about. And it's like, damn,
it's
the pot. What is it? The pot calling the kettle black, like,
right?
Damn.
Yeah, but to actually get to see that manifested, that's really effective. Like normally dream sequences in a horror movie, I'll be like, man, that is some cheap shit right there. Like that just pisses me off most of the time because it's nothing, it's just there to be weird, But in this case, I think it actually works because it's a story we've heard her tell, and then you see her remanifest it in her nightmares. That she's telling him, and you kind of wonder, like, did they actually have part of this conversation and then the dark parts that weren't said or what's sort of nightmarish about it and coming out? Because then she wakes up and she starts freaking out some more. That's when she finds the sketchbook and everything. I didn't pick up on the whole bit about like throwing the thing in the fire and it lit her on fire. That's why she later was begging Stephen, Gabriel Byrne, to throw the book in the fire because she thought it was going to light her on fire again. Like, I didn't pick up on that until this time. And I'm like, oh, that's why she's insistent that he does it. You know, she needs him to do it. But, it's, again, it conjures up a lot of thoughts about things. You know, what is that what it is? And, you see her figure out that her mother and Joan have known each other forever because she finds, she goes through the old family photo albums and finds Joan and she finds out the stuff about, the Demon King payment and all this. And she starts to, piece together why her mother was so close to Charlie because they wouldn't let Peter near her when he was younger, and so she never had a real relationship with him. But Charlie was grandma's, right? And why? It's like that was sort of like plan B. Like, well, we'll stick you in this for right now until we can figure out something better. And there's also that subtle stuff too, where they call the husband about the desecrated grave, and that's going to be a big reveal in a bit, and it just kind of flies by and you don't know, and then he gets a picture in an email about a grave that's dug up and he doesn't know what to do, and when she goes up in that attic, man, and finds the flies and finds the decapitated corpse of her mother, like, I got questions, man. Like, why is it decapitated? What is that supposed to do? Like, I don't understand why that is there. I really don't know why that is there, other than just to be freaky as hell.
Yeah, I think maybe it's like some weird trinity of because it's like of the generations. Charlie lost her head. Annie's going to lose her head. Maybe it has to complete. I don't know, some bullshit of completing a trinity. I don't know.
Guess,
it's like I guess.
Ann Dowd says specifically we reject the Trinity. So
or maybe it's some weird. I don't know. Yeah, you're right. It's weird. It's definitely maybe it's just for shock. Like when you see like the headless corpses, just bowing down at the end of the movie. Like it's definitely bizarre. When you're like, oh, like it's definitely shocking. Like, yeah, say that.
Yeah, it is, but it's also it is the point in the movie when I'm like, oh, now we have fully pulled this train into crazy town. Like now we're gonna start doing crazy gory shit because not long after that is when Gabriel Byrne is lit completely on fire, and I'm like, that did not see the Spinal Tap drummer ending for
definitely,
you. Okay,
definitely an interesting. I think it's a striking image of this movie, and I think Haman is the god or demon god whatever of mischief. I think so. Like I think with that context, it makes sense because I mean I didn't really think that Toni Collette or Annie was saying like you have to throw this in the fire because I want you to be on fire because she's saying like I'm gonna be burst into flames like whatever, and then and then the book gets thrown, and then it's reversed. He gets just burst into flames, and I love Toni Collette's facial expressions in this movie. Like, I'm glad they didn't get memed because if anyone else did those faces in any other movie, they'd be like memed.
Do you want to know what she's doing though? She's doing Shelley Duvall from Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. It's the same face. Go watch it. It is. I don't know, and I don't have any behind the scenes on that or whatever. But I would almost bet you $1 to dime that Ari Aster told her go watch Shelley Duvall when the river of blood's coming out of the elevator, and I want you to do that, but do it Toni Collette style. And because that's what she's doing. I'm sitting there watching it today, and even the music stings, all of that shit. It feels like we just did a fast remake of The Shining. Like real quick right here, like the bonkers crazy shit that goes on at the end of that movie where she's running through the hotel and all that stuff. Like, I feel like that's what happens at the end of this too. Like it is a Shining, but just in your house.
Yeah. And I love Toni Collette because she like in this specifically because she is not afraid to look, not like she doesn't do any pretty running, if that makes sense. You know,
no, she
like,
is not going to
she
be
is
glamorous and crying.
committed to this, you know, and like,
Yeah.
you know, like the scenes when she, like the dream sequence with her and Peter, when they're crying, like she's drooling, like when she suddenly gets, well, when both of them are suddenly wet, you know, these looks of just sadness and anger and grief, and just like she's drooling at one point because she's crying so hard, and then we get to this when her husband just bursts into flames, and it's just look of shock, and then it just, you know, she's gone. You know, Tony is now is in control. You know, Danny isn't here, Mrs. Torrance. You know, she is gone at this point.
Yeah, she's totally and only personified by the fact that somehow Peter has slept through this madness. And well, no, we shouldn't say somehow. The poor boy concusses himself on his desk because I guess it's Payman that does it. Like he holds his hand up and then it makes him just face plant himself on his desk. Not once, but a couple of times before it finally wakes him up out of the trance he's in. And the way Alex Wolff contorts his face, dude, I was like, that's got to be some makeup or stuff. Nope, that's just him. And I was like, well, that's pretty good. That's some Jim Carrey level rubber facing that you're doing there. And I was impressed because he absolutely smashes his nose into that desk.
He wanted to do that for real. He wanted to do that on a real desk. And Ari Aster was like, no, we're going to make this foam. But he still hurt himself because he just committed to throwing it. It was like a foam desk, but he still just threw himself into the desk. And I remember seeing that scene specifically in the trailer. And I was like, oh, like that was like my head turn moment. I was like, oh, what is this movie? When he just smashes his face and just pushes the desk away and is screaming in hysterics. I was like, whoa, what is this movie? And then, so we get to, I think, one of the more, I guess this is a scene that everyone points out of like, look in the background. I remember seeing it my first time. I didn't miss it, of Toni Collette just hanging on the back.
Yeah, doing her Spider-Man routine. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And doing her, what is it? The Exorcist 3 when she's crawling on the wall.
Yes, it is on the ceiling. Much Exorcist 3, yes.
Yeah, so, but it all worked for me. Like, I guess my TV just sucks because I'm in my apartment. Everything is pretty much for free. So I have this like 15-year-old like giant TV, and I don't have the remote, so I can't control the brightness. So I was like, oh, I don't see. I know she's there. I can't see her though. And I miss like the mother in the art room in the beginning of the movie because I'm like, damn, this screen is dark. But
this movie is dark. It is dark in moments, and then it does the Dean Cundy light bulb effect, you know, in the Halloween mask thing. You know, it shows you what it wants you to see in the background while you're paying attention to the foreground. Because, like I said, Peter wakes up and finds his father's burnt corpse on the ground. I mean, they linger on this stuff for long shots, and you just you're watching that trauma fall over him. Because what we have realized too is that. And Gabriel Byrne doesn't get enough credit for the performance he gives in this movie. It's incredibly subtle. Gabriel Byrne is not a subtle performer. It's not what he does. And he has a couple of moments where he kind of loses his shit, and it's like, oh, there's Gabriel Byrne. But, you know, you can tell they really reeled him in. But you can tell that the two of them, like the characters, Stephen and Peter, are very close. And Peter is realizing at that moment, I am so screwed now. I can't even begin to think how screwed I am. And then my mother's being Exorcist Spider-Man behind me. And it is creepy, but she chases him up into that attic. And it's a great chase. And you hear this banging on the attic door. And what I love about the way this scene goes is he's doing everything she's asked, right? He's saying he's sorry. He's like, please stop, and you think she's banging with her fist. No, she is headbutting the friggin' door. It is nuts.
Yeah, creepy image because it's just so unnatural and it's so quick and it's just banging her head against the door and you're like, oh my God. And then at one point you hear the piano and some people were like, oh, it's just some people might say, oh, it's just a creepy noise in the back. No, she is ripping out a piano wire to cut her own head off later on. And it's like so unique that you can hear that what is that, diegetically, is that the word, where it's like incorporated into the scene. It's not just it's not just a sting. It's like it's an unsettling sound because it's happening.
It's actually using the real thing to score it with. It's very organic. It's very much what, like, if you're watching the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre and you see all of those dangling things on the porch, or those bones and stuff, and the music sounds like somebody banging pots and pans and bones together. It's stuff like that. I mean, it's just supposed to match itself. It's a great technique. It is, though. Like, I realized, like, okay, this movie decided all of a sudden, now we're going to turn the Crazy Town dial all the way to 11.
Yeah, 12.
And I'm like, okay, as cool as it is, I'm also realizing, like, I didn't think we were going to go where this movie takes us in the next 5 minutes. And it's particularly when Annie garrots herself with that piano wire and saws her own friggin' head off, that I was like, I mean, and the amount of blood and all the stuff that's going on with it, I was like, I didn't think we were going to get that in this kind of movie. Like, we've seen a corpse, and I did see a beheading earlier, and a lot of flies and all that, like gross ants crawling around, all that stuff. But all that felt really like it's real. Like, that would be how that would go, right? Like, you can imagine that. I cannot imagine anyone in a state enough to be able to saw their own head off with the B major piano wire or whatever she's got there. Like, that took me into a different place, and not one of like, utter shock and horror, because I gasped twice in this movie. It's when Charlie hits the telephone pole and when Steven bursts into flame. And at this point, I'm going, what is happening? Like, how did we get from where we started this 2 hours ago to this? Like, I feel like it just jumped so far ahead. And I don't know, it's just so weird. But I love Peter's response to this. It's the same as the girl in Texas Chainsaw Massacre and in also the lead character in Halloween 6. F it, I'm jumping out the window.
Yeah, get me the hell out. And that's when he sees the naked people in the attic.
Yeah, that's what naked old people too. I'm like, oh, I'm done. That's it.
And jumps. He no hesitation, jumps out the window. It's the closest exit, and he just jumps out of a 3-4 story house, which I was like, oh, okay, what's going on here? And then we get the slow pan in, we see that pulsating light, and he just gets up. And we get the last sequence, which I like.
When Toni Collette's headless body floats across the screen into the treehouse.
It's like the witch almost. So you're
yes,
like, what is going on?
That is not where I thought we were going today, sir. I was like, this is not ending nearly as weirdly as I thought it would. And when we get up there and we've got the mostly naked people, and I don't know. I'm sure Ann Dowd was like, nah, I ain't doing that. So it's like, nope, I'll have on the white gown. Nope, thank you very much. But she's up there. You've got grandma's headless body eating up with maggots. We get a good shot of that, which is gross, but it's there. You got Toni Collette's headless body. Annie's there now. All the other people. And if you look, there's several like close-ups on faces. If you've paid attention, they were all at the funeral. That there were people you've seen before.
In the background, they're waving. Yeah.
And you see one of like a life-size version of one of Charlie's toys that she used to create, like these little stick men things, right? And you realize it's Payman. It's a one of his figures. But the head of it is her like apple head. And I was like, the first time I saw this movie, I was like, that's weird. What the hell is that? It was the second time I watched it, I was like, oh, wait a minute. That's Charlie. Oh, that is. Oh, I didn't think we were going there.
And she has the crown on, and it's very reminiscent. Well, there's a drawing of a pigeon head. Yeah. And earlier when she cut the head off the bird, that's what she was making. So now it's like, oh, it's all come together. Like I don't want to say she's the bird, but it's like, that's her head. She's got the crown. And then this is when, you're Payman, you're the god of whatever.
Yes, when they put the crown on his head and we're here to worship you and all this stuff. And it ends with everybody bowing down.
With that droning, like
Peter Payman.
Perfect. Yeah. Like, brrr, like, oh my, like, it's like, oh man, it's like so fantastical and like epic in this moment.
But it's whiplashing because again, this has been this tight knit drama that is and mystery that has poured out in front of us for the last 15 minutes to just go full on batshit insane.
Oh yeah, this is a swerve. Like what happened to Charlie is like we thought we were going right and we took a hard left. This is like we're skidding out, we're swerving all over the place. But I'm going with it. I guess because I felt like I guess I felt like the movie for me earned everything, and I guess I do go with like absurdist, like really abstract stuff that I'm like, whatever, I'm here.
It's very much reminiscent of the end of the original Rosemary's Baby. Have you ever seen that?
Yep.
Yeah, and just
you're like, oh shit,
just the insane like way that movie ends. It's very much like that. I was like, Ari Aster's got to be a big fan of Rosemary's Baby. And sure enough, I looked it up and I was like, oh yeah, that's one of his favorites. I'm like, you can see it, like it's there. It's just not as that movie doesn't necessarily go crazy. Though I don't know though. We do get like sequences of burning Satan, laying on top of Mia Farrow. So, that for its time, I'm sure that was equivalent to Toni Collette cutting her head off with piano wire. I'm not saying I'm not going with it, Mike. I'm just surprised it went there. Like, I did not think that's what we were going to do in this movie, but we did. It's like going from, okay, I'll give you one. The Silence of the Lambs, we referenced that earlier, right? Elevated horror movie, probably one of the greatest celebrated horror movies of all time, if you want to call it that. The Academy won't, but all horror fans always have, right? And that movie has a turn in it, though, when Hannibal escapes from his temporary cell when they've got him in the museum or whatever, and you go in and you see the carnage, and it's just a couple of shots, but it's like, oh shit, I didn't think we were going there today. And I mean, we're in a movie about a guy who skins people, all right, but we hadn't seen that yet. And then it goes there. It feels very much like that. It's like this, you use the right word. It's epic. It's like, wow, what an epic crescendo that I did not think we were going to get, but it leaves us there. And man, you talk about leaving on a down note, the devil wins.
The devil wins. The Antichrist has been born. And but I do love the final shot of like that. It's just like, it's just the attic room. The edges are all black. It's another diorama, but who's going to make this one? It just goes back to that theme of just like, we're moved. How did she describe she described when she was making the car accident? Oh, it's a neutral view of the accident. Like that's almost like what we're at here. It's like this downer of a beat to end on. Like, everyone's dead. This demon is reincarnated into exactly who he wants to be, and we are just this neutral view watching from afar, watching them literally bow down and saying, "Hail Payman." And I'm like, wow, what an ending!
It's not what I expect. It's not my Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd, Great Gig in the Sky. Like that's uplifting and kind of leaves you feeling hopeful about life. It's much more like Division Bell's High Hopes, where it's like, oh, it's all dead. It's all screwed. We screwed it all up. And I was like, oh, wow. I mean, it definitely feels in that same vein. So, well, Mike, I think we're at the point of the podcast where it's time to give our final thoughts, recommendations, and popcorn ratings. So what are yours for Hereditary?
Yeah, so if it isn't obvious, I really enjoy this movie. I think Ari Aster is among the new young directors that will breathe a new sense of life into cinema. Ari Aster, Robert Eggers, Barry Jenkins, Jordan Peele, dare I say Damien Chazelle, like those guys. These I mean, and a few of those aren't even horror, but these new directors that will be the new, maybe not Spielberg, like, the terms of blockbuster, but just, the Coppolas, the Lucases, the Spielbergs, just, pushing the bounds of cinema and, hopefully creating new movements that, we can witness and be a part of that, gives us, better stories and better movies that anyone can enjoy. Like, this isn't Hereditary. As much as, a Rotten Tomatoes score, Metacritic might say that the audience didn't like it, I think this is a movie that is accessible to anyone. This is a movie that I think it can be really empathetic towards. This isn't like The Lighthouse where it's like, what is going on? This is a pretty straightforward A24 horror film, which A24 has some really obscure stuff, but this is a really accessible one. I think this is a film that people should be talking about, should be seeing, and even if they're just using it as a jumping point to get into different types of horror or different types of narratives. I love the details of the screenplay, of the direction. I think it's a great debut film. One day we can talk about Midsommar as a sophomore effort, but I'm very interested to see what more this director Ari Aster can do. So I would give Hereditary a large popcorn. Not necessarily an extra large, because it does, the swerve that we go at the end of the movie is a little jarring. But it's definitely not a medium. I want a large popcorn because I don't want to move from my seat when I'm seeing this in a movie theater. So yeah, large popcorn and great recommendation.
Yeah, I'll say this about being accessible. I think it's more accessible than Midsommar is, because that's just such a, we'll get to that one day. I'll come over on your show. We'll do the second part over on Amateur Auteurs to talk about that one, because that one certainly is a different length of things. I'm going to go with my Pink Floyd comparisons a little bit more for this, to sum it up. Hereditary is very much like Dark Side of the Moon, in that there's something there for everyone. It doesn't end with Great Gig in the Sky. It doesn't even end with Eclipse, which is a pretty good upbeat. It's much more like if you stuck High Hopes from Division Bell at the end of it to get there. But it's the same thing. Like, you realize you're going on a very ethereal, well thought out, incredibly well crafted trip. And you can get a lot from it through one pass, and you get more the more you pass through it and the more you let it kind of wash over you. This movie and Ari Aster's movies, both of them that I've seen and the shorts I've seen too, kind of wash over you about like a Floyd record does. You know, sometimes it's echoes and you got the dog barking in the background and you don't know what the hell they're doing. And then sometimes it's pretty straightforward what's going on. This movie is totally saved by the fact that you got actors in it that could pull off what they're doing. And you got one playing totally against type. Gabriel Byrne not being an insane person and yelling and screaming at the screen for the entire time he's on there, being the subtle one, is funny to me. Like, that is some subversive humor that we're pulling off. He has the one scene in the seance where he starts losing his mind, but other than that, he doesn't do any Gabriel Byrne stuff. Alex Wolff and Toni Collette, though, are so good in this. And again, I would watch the two of them do a play together, because I think they could really work off of each other well. The cinematography in this is great. The music's well placed. It all works. That last turn where it just goes insane territory takes me aside and makes me just go, I just cocked my head to the side of it and going like, I just didn't see that coming. But maybe that's the charm of the movie, is that it wasn't what I expected, and at no turn did it ever give me exactly what I expected, even when it did obvious stuff that you knew it was going to do. So I give it credit for that. And it did make me very interested in Ari Aster and wanted to know what he's going to do next and where he's going to go. And, you know, the one thing I love about these elevated horror movies, particularly like this one, man, like there is no sequel and I don't want one. Like, it's okay. I'm glad there's not a franchise of this, because I don't know if they could get any more dour than the way they ended here, but it's a strong flick. It's definitely worth seeing for sure. Even if this isn't necessarily your bag, I think this is definitely one to see. And I'm going to give it a large popcorn as well. More or less, it works. But I want to be very clear. If you had less competent performers in these roles, as good as Ari Aster is as a director, and I think he's very talented, I agree with you there, I don't think it works as well. I think it's the combo of this cast. They really hit it out of the park casting this. So kudos on that, and large popcorn for Hereditary. Mike, thanks again for coming on this episode of Film Strip, hanging out here with us in Shocktober, talking about Hereditary. Tell folks again how they can follow you and follow what's going on and coming up for Amateur Auteurs.
Oh, yeah, of course. Always a blast. Time flies when we talk movies, man. You can follow us on Twitter at AuteursPod, and you can email us with any questions, comments, or concerns at the Amateur Auteurs Podcast at gmail.com. You can find us on iTunes. We're on SoundCloud, working on getting on anywhere really that podcasts are found. Still working on that, but that might be more of a 2022 goal, but we'll get there. But yeah, AuteursPod on Twitter and our email. We're always love fan interaction or just any interaction at all. But yeah, thanks again, man. It's always a blast. I'm glad to help out.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Always fun to have you here. And we'll definitely have you on again after the first of the year, because you and I have another date with a musical, my friend, because I saw the trailer to Spielberg's West Side Story and I got words. I got thoughts. And,
oh, man. Wait, has a trailer come out?
Yes.
When did it come out?
I saw it in front of Dear Evan Hansen, which Irene and I reviewed a couple weeks ago.
I haven't seen this trailer.
Yeah, I cut out my comments from the show, but just to pull it back behind the scenes, she and I both saw that trailer and we're like, "Oh, I got thoughts." So I'm curious. We'll see. We'll have to get around to that one. That'll be a fun, lighter tour back, and then look forward to being on Amateur Tours as always, folks. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of Film Strip. You can find all the links to how you can keep up with the show at filmstrippodcast.com. Take you to our big link tree, and if you go to from there, you can find all places you can find the podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify. Leave us a positive review, share the show, and follow us on our social media at FilmStripPod on Twitter and Instagram. We appreciate the support. Until next time, for Mike, I'm Jay. Thank you for listening to Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.